My name is Vivienne Ashford, and despite everything I've achieved, I was never good enough for my family. But that night, everything changed. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away from someone who refused to see your worth. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office at Meridian Trust Holdings, each droplet catching the amber glow of Burlington's autumn skyline. Vermont had always been my sanctuary, a place where old money whispered rather than shouted, where success was measured in decades rather than quarters. At 32, I built something most people only dreamed of, a portfolio worth 8 figures, a reputation that opened doors across New England, and the kind of financial independence that should have bought me respect, should have. I traced my fingers along the mahogany desk that had once belonged to my mentor, Harrison Blackwood, the founder of Meridian Trust. He'd handpicked me from Harvard Business School 7 years ago, seeing something in me that my own family had never bothered to look for. Under his guidance, I transformed from a hungry graduate into one of the youngest senior partners in the firm's history. My specialty was high net worth estate planning, helping wealthy families preserve their legacies across generations. The irony wasn't lost on me that I excelled at protecting other people's family wealth while my own family treated me like an outsider. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband, Marcus. Mom wants to know if you can pick up the wine for Saturday. She's very specific about the vintage Margaret Ashford, my mother-in-law, the woman who had made it her life's mission to remind me that I would never be enough for her precious son. Even now, 3 years into our marriage, she still introduced me at social gatherings as Marcus's wife who works in finance, was it? As if managing a $2 billion trust portfolio was some quaint hobby. I typed back, of course. Which vintage? 1985 Chateau Margaux. She said you'd understand the significance. I did understand. It was the year Marcus was born, and Margaret's not-so-subtle way of reminding me that their bond predated mine by 3 decades. The wine would cost roughly $4,000 per bottle, and she'd undoubtedly won at least 6 bottles for their family's annual autumn gathering, $24,000 to prove I belonged at their table. I made the call to Whitmore and Sons, Burlington's most exclusive wine merchant. William, it's Vivienne Ashford. I need 6 bottles of the 85 Chateau Margaux for a Saturday evening. Ah, Mrs. Ashford, I'm afraid we only have 3 bottles of that particular vintage in stock. However, I could source 3 more from our sister location in Boston. They'd arrive Friday morning. Perfect. And William? Have them delivered directly to the Ashford estate on Lake Champlain. I want them presented in your finest wooden case, of course. May I ask what the occasion is? I stared out at the lake in the distance, its surface choppy and gray under the storm clouds. A family gathering. Margaret Ashford is celebrating another year of her son's existence. William chuckled knowingly. Ah yes, Mrs. Margaret Ashford. We've had the pleasure of serving the family for decades. I'll ensure everything is perfect. As I hung up, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach that accompanied any interaction involving Marcus's family. The Ashfords of Burlington weren't just wealthy, they were legacy wealthy. Marcus's great-great-grandfather had made his fortune in lumber and railroad investments in the 1800s, and each subsequent generation had carefully tended that fortune like a sacred flame. When I'd first met Marcus at a charity gala in Boston 5 years ago, I'd been drawn to his quiet confidence and genuine kindness. He was nothing like the entitled trust fund babies I'd encountered in my professional life. He ran a successful architectural firm, designing sustainable luxury homes for Vermont's elite, and seemed refreshingly grounded despite his family's wealth. It wasn't until I met Margaret that I understood why she had raised Marcus with an acute awareness of his family's legacy and his responsibility to preserve it. In her mind, that included marrying someone who would enhance the Ashford name, preferably a woman from an equally established family. With the right breeding, education, and social connections, I was nouveau riche at best. My father had been a successful contractor in New Hampshire, and my mother had worked as a high school principal. I'd earned my wealth through intelligence, dedication, and strategic investments, not inheritance. To Margaret, this made me fundamentally different and fundamentally inferior. The first time she'd met me, at a dinner party in their Beacon Hill townhouse, she'd asked about my people with the kind of smile that suggested she already knew. The answer would disappoint her. When I'd mentioned my father's construction business, she'd nodded politely and immediately changed the subject to Marcus's cousin Penelope, who had just announced her engagement to a Massachusetts state senator. Family connections are so important, she'd said, looking directly at me. They provide such stability across generations. Marcus had squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture of support that I'd appreciated then. Now, 3 years into our marriage, I wondered if his quiet support was enough to counterbalance his mother's active hostility. The worst part was how subtle it all was. Margaret never raised her voice or made outright accusations. She was a master of the backhanded compliment, the strategic pause, the meaningful glance. She could make me feel completely unwelcome while maintaining perfect social etiquette like the time she'd given me a cookbook for Christmas, specifically traditional New England recipes for the modern kitchen, while giving Marcus's sister-in-law an antique diamond bracelet that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother. I thought, "You might enjoy learning some of our family's favorite dishes," she'd said sweetly. Cooking is such an intimate way to connect with tradition. The message was clear. I was still learning how to be part of their family, while others were already established members worthy of heirloom jewelry or the way she'd forgotten to include Emmy in the family's annual holiday card photo, claiming there hadn't been enough room in the frame. Despite the fact that Marcus's brother's girlfriend, someone they'd been dating for only 6 months, had been prominently featured, Marcus always had an excuse for his mother's behavior. She was old-fashioned. She needed time to adjust. She was protective of her children. But I was beginning to suspect that Margaret's treatment of me wasn't an adjustment period. It was a campaign my assistant, Jennifer, knocked softly. "On my office door, Mrs. Ashford, your 4 o'clock is here." I glanced at my calendar, the Weatherby estate consultation. Another wealthy Vermont family looking to restructure their assets for the next generation. Send them in. As I prepared for the meeting, I pushed thoughts of Margaret and the weekend gathering to the back of my mind. I had built my reputation on being unflappable, on providing clear-headed financial guidance regardless of my personal circumstances. My clients trusted me to protect their legacies, and I wouldn't let family drama compromise that trust. But as the Weatherbys settled into the leather chairs across from my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that this weekend would be different. Margaret had been unusually insistent about the wine, about making sure everything was absolutely perfect for what she kept calling a very special family celebration. I had learned to be suspicious of Margaret's special celebrations Friday. Afternoon brought crisp October air and the kind of golden light that made Vermont look like a painting. I drove my Tesla Model S along the winding road that bordered Lake Champlain, the autumn foliage creating a canopy of fire above me. This was my favorite time of year in Vermont. When the tourists had gone home and the locals reclaimed their hidden paradise, my destination wasn't the main Ashford estate, where tomorrow's gathering would take place, but a smaller property I discovered and purchased 2 years ago. The lake house sat on a private peninsula about 10 miles north of the family estate, a 1920s arts and crafts masterpiece that had been lovingly maintained by its previous owners. I'd fallen in love with it the moment I'd seen the listing. Unlike the imposing Victorian grandeur of the main Ashford estate, the lake house was intimate and warm. Craftsman-style windows framed perfect views of the water, and the interior featured rich wood paneling, built-in bookcases, and a stone fireplace that dominated the main living area. More importantly, it was mine. I'd purchased it with my own money in my own name, as a retreat where I could escape the suffocating expectations of Burlington society. Marcus loved it too, and we'd spent countless weekends there, cooking together in the galley kitchen, reading by the fire, and making love to the sound of water lapping against the shore. It was the one place where I felt completely at peace. I pulled into the circular gravel driveway and smiled as I saw Marcus's Range Rover already parked near the front entrance. He'd driven up after finishing work at his firm, and I could see smoke curling from the chimney. The sight filled me with warmth. Whatever tensions existed with his family, Marcus and I built something beautiful together. I found him in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for what looked like his famous autumn stew. He'd changed out of his work clothes into jeans and a wool sweater that brought out the green in his eyes. At 34, Marcus still had the lean build of the college athlete he'd been, and his dark hair was just beginning to show distinguished threads of silver at the temples. Perfect timing, he said, kissing me softly as I set down my purse. I was just thinking the stew needed someone more interesting to share it with. Flattery will get you everywhere, I replied, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind as he returned to his chopping. How long until dinner? About an hour. Just enough time for you to tell me about your day and for us to open something special. He gestured toward the counter, where I saw a bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon 2008, chilling in an ice bucket. What's the occasion? Marcus turned in my arms, his expression suddenly serious. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something before tomorrow's gathering. My stomach tightened. What about it? My mother called this afternoon. She mentioned that she has some kind of announcement to make. Something about the family's legacy and ensuring its preservation. I stepped back, studying his face. Did she give you any details? Not really, but Vivienne ... He took my hands in his. I want you to know that whatever she says, whatever happens tomorrow, it doesn't change anything between us. You're my wife, my partner, and I love you exactly as you are. The words should have been reassuring, but instead they filled me with dread. If Marcus felt the need to preemptively defend our relationship, whatever Margaret had planned was worse than I'd imagined. Marcus, has your mother said something specific about me? He hesitated just long enough to confirm my fears. She's been concerned about some things. About our future, about children, about how our family's assets will be managed going forward. Children. We'd been trying for over a year now with no success. It was a source of private pain that I'd shared only with Marcus and my doctor. The tests showed nothing wrong with either of us. Sometimes these things just took time. But I knew Margaret viewed my failure to immediately produce an heir as another mark against me. She thinks I'm not good enough for you. I said quietly, she thinks she's protecting the family legacy. There's a difference. Is there? Marcus pulled me closer, resting his forehead against mine. My mother has very specific ideas about how things should be done. But those are her ideas, not mine. I chose you, Vivienne. I chose us. We opened the champagne and took our glasses out to the wraparound porch that faced the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. This view had sold me on the property, the sense of infinite possibility that came from looking out over water that stretched to the horizon. I have something for you, Marcus said suddenly. He disappeared into the house and returned with a small wrapped package. Inside was a vintage silver locket, obviously an antique, with intricate engraving around the edges. When I opened it, I found a tiny photograph of the two of us from our wedding day, laughing as rice fell around us like it belonged to my great-grandmother, Marcus explained. She gave it to my great-grandfather when he left for France during World War I. She told him it would bring him home safely. I looked up at him in surprise. Marcus, this should stay in the family. You are family, he said firmly. And I thought, given how things have been with my mother, I wanted you to have something that represents the other side of the Ashford legacy, the side that believes in love over duty and personal choice over family expectation. I fastened the locket around my neck, feeling the weight of it settle against my chest. It's beautiful. But won't your mother be upset? Probably, but it's not her decision to make. We spent the evening talking by the fire, sharing the kind of intimate conversation that had first drawn us together. Marcus told me about his latest architectural project, a sustainable vacation home for a tech entrepreneur from Boston. I shared some of the more amusing stories from my week, including a client who had insisted on leaving her entire fortune to her pet parrot for a few hours. I forgot about Margaret and her mysterious announcement. This was what mattered, the life Marcus and I had built together, the love that had sustained us through 3 years of his mother's subtle warfare. But as we prepared for bed, I caught myself touching the locket at my throat and wondering if Margaret would see it as another provocation. Everything with her was a chess game, and I never seemed to be playing by the right rules. Marcus, I said as we brushed our teeth side by side at the master bathroom's double vanity. What if your mother never accepts me? He met my eyes in the mirror. Then that's her loss. But Vivienne, I really think if you just give her more time. It's been 3 years. I know. But she's starting to see how successful you are, how much you mean to me. The wine you ordered for tomorrow, that's exactly the kind of gesture that will show her you understand family traditions. I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut told me that no gesture would ever be enough for Margaret Ashford. In her mind, I would always be the woman who had stolen her son from whatever perfectly connected debutante she'd had picked out. For him, as we fell asleep to the sound of water against the shore, I held on to Marcus's warmth and tried to push away the growing certainty that tomorrow would change everything. Saturday morning dawned with the kind of crisp clarity that made October in Vermont feel like a promise. I woke early before Marcus and made coffee in the lake house's cozy kitchen while watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of pearl and gold. This is my meditation time, the quiet hour before the world demanded my attention. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, my assistant. Emergency at the office. The Morrison Trust needs immediate attention. Can you call when convenient? I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and dialed her number. What's the situation? Robert Morrison died unexpectedly last night. Heart attack? His wife is panicking about the estate transition, and their attorney is asking for our immediate input on the trust structure. The Morrison account was worth $47 million, and spent months crafting a complex trust arrangement that would minimize tax liability while providing for 3 generations of beneficiaries. If Mrs. Morrison was panicking, she might make rash decisions that could cost the family millions. I'll need to call her directly, I said. And Jennifer, can you pull the complete Morrison file and have it ready? I might need to drive back to Burlington this afternoon. Of course. I'm so sorry this is happening on your weekend. This was the reality of managing high net worth clients. Emergencies didn't respect personal time. I spent the next hour on the phone with Mrs. Morrison, walking her through the estate transition process and assuring her that everything had been properly structured. Her husband's death was tragic, but financially, the family was completely protected by the time Marcus woke up. I was already dressed and reviewing the Morrison Trust documents on my laptop. Client emergency? He asked, kissing the top of my head as he poured his own coffee. Robert Morrison died last night. I need to make sure his wife doesn't make any impulsive decisions about the estate. Marcus nodded knowingly. He'd lived with me long enough to understand that my client's financial security often depended on my immediate availability. How long do you need? I should be finished by noon. That gives us plenty of time to get ready for your mother's gathering. I spent the morning managing the Morrison crisis from the lake house's small office, a converted sunroom with built-in desks, and perfect lake views. By 11:30, I'd successfully guided Mrs. Morrison through the immediate decisions and arranged for a Monday morning meeting to address longer-term planning. As I closed my laptop, I felt the familiar satisfaction that came from solving complex financial puzzles. This was what I was good at, protecting wealth, preserving legacies, ensuring that families could weather unexpected storms. It was ironic that I could navigate other people's family dynamics with such expertise, while my own remained such a minefield. Marcus and I spent the afternoon preparing for the evening gathering. I chose my outfit carefully, a navy silk dress from Armani that was elegant without being flashy, paired with simple pearl earrings and a silver locket Marcus had given me. The goal was to look like someone who belonged at a high society. Gathering without appearing to try too hard. Margaret's events were always perfectly orchestrated affairs, and tonight would be no exception. The Ashford estate sat on 27 acres of prime Lake Champlain waterfront with gardens designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and a main house that had been featured in Architectural Digest. Margaret had spent decades establishing herself as Burlington's premier hostess, and her gatherings were legendary among Vermont's social elite. As we drove the 10 miles from the lake house to the main estate, Marcus reached over and took my hand. "You look beautiful," he said. "And whatever happens tonight, remember that we're a team." The Ashford estate was already glowing with warm light when we arrived. Valet parking had been arranged, and I could see at least 15 luxury vehicles in the circular drive: Mercedes, BMW S, and the occasional Bentley that signaled old Vermont money. Margaret had clearly invited more than just family for this intimate gathering. "Marcus, darling," she said, embracing her son warmly before turning to me with a polite smile. "Vivienne, how lovely that you could join us." As if I might have had somewhere else to be. "Thank you for including me, Margaret." "I hope you received the wine delivery." "Oh yes, the Chateau Margaux. Very ... extravagant. Though I do wonder if the 82 might have been a more appropriate choice for tonight's celebration." Of course. Even a $20,000 gesture wasn't quite right. The main parlor was filled with familiar faces from Burlington's social circle, along with various Ashford family members I'd met at previous gatherings. Marcus's brother Jonathan was there with his wife Susan, their 2 young children, and Susan's parents, a banking family from Boston whose lineage could be traced back to the Mayflower. Marcus's sister Carolyn had flown in from New York with her investment banker husband and their teenage daughter. I recognized several other faces: the mayor of Burlington, a federal judge, 2 state legislators, and various business leaders who formed the nucleus of Vermont's establishment. This wasn't just a family gathering. It was a social event designed to make some kind of statement. Margaret had arranged the seating with her usual attention to strategic positioning. I found myself placed between Dr. William Hartwell, a prominent physician, and Mrs. Elizabeth Thorne, whose family had owned most of downtown Burlington's commercial real estate for 3 generations. Marcus was seated across the table, but 3 seats down, far enough away that conversation would be difficult. The dinner itself was flawless. Locally sourced ingredients prepared by a chef Margaret had flown in from Boston, paired with wines. That probably costs more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. The conversation flowed smoothly through topics appropriate for Vermont's elite: the upcoming elections, conservation efforts around Lake Champlain, and various charitable initiatives I participated when spoken to, but I could feel myself being evaluated by every person at the table. This was how Margaret's circle worked. Newcomers were assessed, judged, and either accepted or quietly excluded. After 3 years, I still felt like I was auditioning for a role I wasn't sure I wanted. It wasn't until dessert was served that Margaret stood and tapped her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent with the kind of immediate attention that suggested everyone had been expecting this moment. "My dear friends and family," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Tonight is indeed a very special celebration. As many of you know, the Ashford family has been blessed to call Vermont home for over 150 years. Our ancestors built their legacy through careful stewardship, strategic partnerships, and an unwavering commitment to preserving what matters most." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room before settling briefly on me. "Legacy isn't just about money, though financial security is certainly important. It's about values, traditions, and ensuring that future generations understand their responsibilities to family and community." My chest tightened. Whatever was coming, I could feel it building like a storm on the horizon, which is why I'm so pleased to announce that the Ashford Family Trust will be restructured to ensure our legacy continues for generations to come. After extensive consultation with our attorneys and financial advisors, we've established new guidelines for trust beneficiaries, guidelines that prioritize family stability, proven commitment to our values, and she paused again, this time looking directly at Marcus, the continuation of the Ashford bloodline. The room seemed to hold its breath. I could feel my face burning, but I kept my expression carefully neutral. "Marcus, as you know, your father, and I have always believed that with privilege comes responsibility. The family assets, including the trust, the real estate holdings, and various business interests, will be distributed based on specific criteria designed to ensure family stability. She reached for a folder that had been placed beside her chair. These criteria include marriage to someone of appropriate background and social standing, demonstrated commitment to family traditions, and most importantly, the birth of legitimate heirs within 5 years of marriage. The words hit me like a physical blow. 5 years of marriage. Marcus and I had been married for 3 years, which meant we had 2 years to produce children, or he would be effectively disinherited. Now, I know this might seem traditional to some, Margaret continued with a gracious smile, but family wealth comes with family obligations. Those who cannot meet these obligations obviously have different priorities, and the trust should reflect that reality. I looked across the table at Marcus, expecting to see shock or anger on his face. Instead, I saw something that made my blood run cold: resignation. He'd known this was coming. Of course, Margaret continued, there are immediate implications for current family members. The lake house property that was recently purchased. She looked directly at me. Since it was bought with what could be considered family resources, it will need to be transferred to the trust to ensure proper management. My lake house. She was talking about my lake house, the property I'd purchased with my own money. In my own name, as my personal retreat. Somehow, Margaret had decided it belonged to the family trust. I found my voice. I'm sorry, Margaret, but I think there's been some confusion. The lake house was purchased with my personal funds. From my investment portfolio, it's in my name only. Margaret's smile never wavered. Oh, my dear, but you're married to Marcus. In practical terms, what's yours is his, and what's his belongs to the family. Surely someone in your profession understands how family assets work. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. She was dismissing my professional expertise, while simultaneously claiming ownership of my property. Furthermore, she continued, I've taken the liberty of arranging for the property to be sold. The proceeds will be added to the family trust, where they can be properly managed for everyone's benefit. The room was absolutely silent. I could feel every pair of eyes watching me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public humiliation. You've arranged to sell my property? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. Well, technically, Marcus arranged it. As your husband, he has every right to make decisions about family assets. The buyer is quite eager, a lovely family from Boston who appreciate properties with such character. I looked at Marcus again, and this time I saw the truth in his eyes. He'd known about the sale. He'd participated in it. My husband, the man who had given me his great-grandmother's locket just yesterday, had conspired with his mother to sell the one place in the world that belonged entirely to me. The closing is scheduled for Monday morning, Margaret concluded. Isn't it wonderful how quickly these things can be arranged when everyone is in agreement? But I wasn't in agreement. I had never agreed to any of this. And as I sat there in that perfect dining room, surrounded by Vermont's elite, I realized that I had been playing Margaret's game all wrong. I had been trying to earn her acceptance by playing by her rules. But Margaret's rules were designed to ensure I could never win it. It was time to play by my own rules. I excused myself from the table with the kind of polite smile I perfected during 3 years of Margaret's gatherings. If you'll excuse me, I need to make a quick phone call. Client emergency. No one questioned this. They all knew I worked in finance, and weekend emergencies were part of the territory. As I walked calmly toward the front hall, I could hear the conversation resuming behind me. Margaret's voice holding court as she explained the finer points of the trust. Restructuring to her captivated audience, I stepped onto the front porch and immediately called my attorney, David Chen, at his home number. David had handled my personal legal matters for over 5 years, including the purchase of the lake house. Vivienne? Everything all right? David, I need you to listen carefully. Has anyone contacted you about the sale of my lake house property? You're related in? Lake house? No, of course not. Why would they? Because my mother-in-law just announced to a room full of people that she's arranged to sell it, with the closing scheduled for Monday morning. There was a pause. Vivienne, that's impossible, right? The property is titled solely in your name. No one can sell it without your explicit consent and signature. That's what I thought. But she seems very confident about this sale. Someone's been feeding her incorrect information, or she's bluffing to manipulate you. Either way, no sale can proceed without you. Do you want me to make some calls? Not yet. But David, I want you to be prepared for whatever legal action might be necessary. And I want to understand all my options regarding the property. Of course, are you safe? This sounds like a difficult situation. Safe? It was an interesting question. I was physically safe, surrounded by Vermont's most prominent citizens. But in every other sense, I was under attack. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, and hung up. I stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens and the lake beyond. The Ashford estate was beautiful. There was no denying that. But it was also a fortress, designed to keep certain people in and others out. For 3 years, I'd been trying to prove I belonged inside these walls now. I realized I'd been fighting the wrong battle. I returned to the dining room just as dessert was being cleared. Margaret looked up as I took my seat, her expression questioning. Everything resolved? She asked sweetly. Actually, yes. Very resolved. The after-dinner conversation continued in the main parlor where coffee and cognac were being served. I positioned myself near the French doors that led to the terrace, nursing a cup of coffee I didn't want while listening to the easy chatter of people who had never questioned their place in the world. Marcus approached me during a lull in the conversation. Vivienne, we should talk. Yes, we should, but not here. I know you're upset about the lake house, but if you just let me explain. Marcus, I looked directly into his eyes. Did you sign papers authorizing the sale of my property? He had the decency to look ashamed. My mother explained that it would be better for everyone if... Did you sign papers? Vivienne, please. It's complicated. That was my answer. My husband had attempted to sell my property without my knowledge or consent. Whatever manipulation his mother had used, whatever pressure she'd applied, he had chosen to betray me rather. Then defend May felt something cold and final settle in my chest. This wasn't about the house anymore. This was about discovering that the man I'd married would sacrifice my trust to appease his mother's demands. Ladies and gentlemen, I heard myself saying, my voice carrying clearly across the parlor. The room gradually fell silent. As people turned to look at me, Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. She could sense that something had shifted, but she wasn't sure what. I want to thank you all for such a lovely evening, I continued, moving to the center of the room. Margaret, your hospitality is, as always, impeccable. And I'm so grateful that you've given me this opportunity to address everyone at once. Margaret's smile became strained. How thoughtful, dear. Though I'm not sure, you see, there seems to have been some confusion about my lake house property. Margaret announced that it's being sold, with the proceeds going to the family trust. And while I appreciate the initiative, I'm afraid there's been a significant misunderstanding. I could feel the tension in the room ratcheting up. These people were accustomed to polite disagreements handled through whispered conversations and private meetings. Public confrontations were unseemly. The property in question was purchased entirely with my personal funds, from investment accounts that I established and managed independently. It's titled solely in my name, and no sale can proceed without my explicit consent. I paused, letting this information settle. Several people were looking confused, glancing between Margaret and me as if trying to understand what was happening more. Importantly, I've just spoken with my attorney, who confirms that no legitimate sale documents exist. So either someone has been providing inaccurate information, or... I looked directly at Margaret. Someone has been attempting to commit real estate fraud. The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret's face had gone pale, but her composure remained intact. Vivienne. Dear? She said carefully. I think there's been some miscommunication, Marcus assured me. Marcus has no legal authority over my separately owned property, just as I have no authority over property that belongs solely to him. I turned to face my husband. Isn't that right, Marcus? He looked like a man caught between two forces of nature. Vivienne, maybe we should discuss this privately. Oh, I think we're past private discussions. Your mother has made a public announcement about selling my property. I think the correction should be equally public. I could see people beginning to understand what was happening. Dr. Hartwell was frowning deeply. Mrs. Thorne looked genuinely shocked. The mayor was studying his cognac as if it held the secrets of the universe. Furthermore, I continued, I want to address this new trust structure that's been announced. While I'm sure it reflects the family's values, it doesn't reflect mine. The idea that a woman's worth is measured by her ability to produce heirs within a specified time frame is, I paused, choosing my words carefully, antiquated. Margaret finally found her voice. The trust requirements ensure family stability. The trust requirements ensure control. There's a difference. I walked over to where Marcus stood, his face a mask of mortification and confusion. Very gently, I removed his great-grandmother's locket from around my neck and placed it in his hands. This is beautiful, Marcus, and it belongs with your family. All of it belongs with your family. I turned back to the room. I want to thank you all again for a truly enlightening evening. It's been educational in ways I never expected. As I walked toward the front hall, I could hear Margaret's voice behind me, already beginning the damage control that would be necessary after such a public spectacle. Well, I think we can all understand that emotions run high when family decisions are being made. Perhaps we should move to the library for coffee, but I was already gone, walking through the front door and into the October night. The valet looked surprised as I requested my car. Guests didn't typically leave Margaret Ashford's gatherings. Early and certainly not alone as I drove away from the estate, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Complete clarity. The marriage was over. Not because of tonight's betrayal, but because tonight had revealed what had always been true. Marcus would always choose. His mother's approval over our partnership at the lake house was safe. Margaret's bluff had been called, and no sale could proceed without my consent. But more than that, I had reclaimed something essential about myself. I had remembered who I was before I'd started trying to become someone else. I was Vivienne Ashford, senior partner at Meridian Trust Holdings, manager of a $2 billion portfolio, and a woman who had never needed anyone's permission to build the life she wanted. It was time to start acting like Eddie spent Sunday morning at the lake house, sitting on the porch with coffee and my laptop, methodically planning my next moves. The October sun was brilliant on the water, and the silence was perfect for strategic thinking. This was how I approached complex financial problems, with careful analysis, multiple scenarios, and a clear understanding of all available resources. Margaret had declared war, but she had made a critical error. She had underestimated her opponent. My phone rang at 9:30. Marcus, Vivienne, please. We need to talk. I'm listening, not over the phone. Can I come to the lake house? I considered this. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the clean break I'd made the night before. But another part of me, the part that still remembered, falling in love with this man, needed to hear what he had to say. You have 1 hour, I said. He arrived 45 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he was wearing the same clothes from the night before. He found me on the porch where I was reviewing financial documents while enjoying the morning sun. You look calm, he said, settling into the chair across from me. I am calm. It's amazing how clarity can bring peace. Marcus studied my face, perhaps looking for signs of the emotional devastation he expected. Vivienne, I know how last night must have looked. It looked like my husband conspired with his mother to steal my property and publicly humiliate me. How should it have looked? He winced. I never signed any papers. I want you to know that. But you let her believe you would. She was so insistent about the trust restructuring, about securing the family's future. She said the lake house represented a conflict of interest, but it would be better for everyone if Marcus. I closed my laptop and gave him my full attention. Do you hear yourself? You're explaining your mother's reasoning as if it justifies what happened. I'm trying to help you understand. I understand perfectly. Your mother decided I was a threat to her vision of the family legacy. Rather than accept me as your wife, she chose to wage psychological warfare. And rather than defend me, you chose to enable her. The words hung in the air between us. Marcus looked out at the lake, his jaw working as he processed what I'd said. It's not that simple, he said finally. Actually, it is. In every marriage, there are moments when you choose your spouse over everyone else, including family. Last night was one of those moments. You made your choice. I love you, Vivienne. I know you do. But you love your mother's approval more. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. What do you want me to do? It was the right question, but it had come. 3 years too late. I want you to be happy, Marcus. But I want that for myself too. After he left, I spent the rest of Sunday preparing for the week ahead. I had decisions to make that would affect every aspect of my life, and I needed to approach them with the same analytical rigor I brought to my professional work. First, I called David Chun and asked him to begin divorce proceedings. Vermont was a no-fault divorce state, which would simplify matters. But given the complexity of our financial situation, I wanted everything handled correctly from the beginning. Are you sure about this, Vivienne? Sometimes these family disputes can be resolved with mediation. David, I need you to understand something. This isn't a family dispute. This is a pattern of manipulation that's been going on for 3 years. Last night was just the first time it was done publicly. All right, I'll prepare the initial paperwork. What about property division? Everything I brought into the marriage remains mine. Everything he brought remains his. We'll split anything we purchase jointly during the marriage. That's very reasonable. What about spousal support? I almost laughed. I make more money than he does, David. If anything, the question would be whether he needs support from me. Right. I forgot who I was talking to. My second call was to Jennifer at the office. I need you to clear my schedule for Tuesday afternoon. I have some personal business to attend to. Of course. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect. Actually, Jennifer, I'm going to need you to research something for me. I want to know everything about Margaret Ashford's financial situation. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, credit lines, everything. There was a pause. Mrs. Ashford, is this related to your divorce proceedings? No, this is related to something else entirely. Jennifer was brilliant at financial research. It was one of the reasons I'd hired her. Within 24 hours, she compiled a comprehensive report on Margaret's finances. What I discovered was fascinating. Margaret Ashford lived well, but she lived beyond her means. The Ashford Family Trust provided her with a substantial annual income, but her expenses, CONSISTENTLY, exceeded that income. She maintained the family estate, funded her elaborate social gatherings, and supported various charitable causes that enhanced her social standing. To bridge the gap, she had taken out several significant loans using her trust income as collateral. More importantly, she had recently made some questionable investment decisions. She put nearly $2 million into a luxury resort development project in Costa Rica, a project that my research suggested was unlikely to succeed. Margaret Ashford, despite her imperious confidence, was financially vulnerable. This gave me an idea. Tuesday afternoon, I drove to the Ashford estate. I hadn't called ahead, but I knew Margaret would be home. She hosted a weekly bridge club for Burlington's social elite every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. I was shown into the morning room by the housekeeper, where I found Margaret and 3 other women in the middle of what appeared to be an intense rubber of bridge. The other women, all familiar faces from Saturday night's gathering, looked surprised and slightly uncomfortable to see me. Vivienne, Margaret said coolly, not looking up from her cards. How unexpected. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just our weekly game. Ladies, perhaps we could take a brief recess? The other women gathered their purses with obvious relief and disappeared toward the main parlor, leaving Margaret and me alone. "I assume you're here about the divorce proceedings," Margaret said, finally looking at me directly. "Marcus told me this morning." "Actually, I'm here about something else entirely." I opened my briefcase and removed a folder. "I understand you've made some significant investments recently. The Costa Rica resort project, specifically." Margaret's composure slipped slightly. "I'm not sure what business that is of yours. Normally, it wouldn't be. But I've done some research into the project, and I'm afraid you may have been given some inaccurate information about its prospects." I opened the folder and spread out several documents on the card table. Financial projections, environmental impact reports, legal filings from the Costa Rican government. The development has been halted indefinitely due to environmental concerns. The lead developers are facing fraud charges. In the land itself, ... I pointed to a specific document. Turns out it was never properly zoned for commercial development. Margaret was staring at the documents, her face pale. "Where did you get this information?" "I have colleagues throughout the financial industry. When someone I know is about to lose $2 million, I feel obligated to help." "What do you want?" "I want to make you an offer." I removed another set of documents from my briefcase. Firm specializes in high-risk investment recovery. We've successfully recovered assets from failed developments, fraudulent schemes, and various other financial disasters. I can recover most of your Costa Rica investment, probably 80 to 90%. Margaret was silent, studying the documents I presented. "In exchange," I continued, "I want something very simple. I want you to publicly apologize for Saturday night's performance. I want you to acknowledge that you had no authority to sell my property and that your announcement was based on incorrect information. That's all. That's all." Margaret was quiet for several minutes, obviously weighing her options. $2 million was a significant loss, even for someone with her resources. More importantly, if word got out that she'd been defrauded by obvious scammers, her reputation as a savvy socialite would be severely damaged. And if I refuse, then you lose $2 million. And everyone in Burlington eventually learns that Margaret Ashford was taken in by a real estate scam. It wasn't really a choice, and we both knew it. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll make the apology. But I want it done privately, not at some public gathering." "Oh no," I said, smiling. "You made your announcement publicly. The correction needs to be equally public." "What do you have in mind?" "Your annual Halloween charity gala. You'll have all the same people in attendance, plus several dozen more of Vermont's most prominent citizens. You'll make a brief announcement acknowledging your error, and then we'll all move on with our lives." Margaret's Halloween gala was legendary, a black tie fundraiser that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for various Burlington charities while cementing her position as the city's premier hostess. It was exactly the kind of high-profile event where a public apology would have maximum impact. "You're enjoying this," she said quietly. "I'm enjoying the clarity. For 3 years, you've played games with me, Margaret. You've questioned my background, dismissed my achievements, and treated me like an interloper in my own marriage. You've been subtle about it, clever about it, but you've been relentless." I gathered up my documents and returned them to my briefcase. "Last Saturday, you decided to escalate those games. You made your warfare public, thinking I would be too embarrassed or too weak to fight back. But you miscalculated. I'm very good at games, Margaret. I just prefer to play them on my own terms." As I stood to leave, Margaret spoke again. "What about Marcus? What about him? He loves you. Despite everything that's happened, he really does love you." I paused at the door. "I know he does. But love without respect isn't enough, and love without courage is worthless." I left Margaret sitting alone in her morning room, surrounded by the debris of an interrupted bridge game and the wreckage of her carefully constructed superiority. The Halloween gala was still 3 weeks away, but I was already looking forward to it. The weeks leading up to Margaret's Halloween gala passed with surprising efficiency. David Chun handled the divorce paperwork with his usual thoroughness, and Marcus, to his credit, didn't contest anything. Our property division was straightforward. I kept the lake house and my investment accounts. He kept his architectural firm and his trust fund expectations. We met only once during this period at David's office to sign the final papers. Marcus looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of his choices had finally settled on his shoulders. "I keep thinking I should fight for us," he said as we waited for the notary to finish preparing the documents. "Why don't you?" "Because I think you're right. About me choosing my mother's approval over our marriage. I didn't see it at the time, but ... double quotes. He shrugged helplessly. "I've been trained my whole life to maintain family harmony. I never learned how to choose my own happiness over everyone else's expectations. It's not too late to learn." "Maybe. But probably not with you. Probably not." We signed the papers in silence, and then we were no longer married. Meanwhile, I threw myself into Margaret's Costa Rica problem with the kind of focused intensity that had made my professional reputation. The recovery process was complex, involving international banking laws, fraud investigations, and negotiations with multiple government agencies. But by the end of October, I had successfully recovered $1.7 million of Margaret's $2 million investment. She was grudgingly grateful, though she couldn't resist pointing out that I promised 80 to 90% recovery. 85% is still quite good, I replied, especially considering that without intervention, you would have recovered 0%. The Halloween gala was scheduled for Saturday, October 30th, at the Ashford estate. Margaret had chosen Venetian masquerade as the theme, which meant elaborate costumes, ornate masks, and the kind of theatrical elegance that she did better than anyone in Vermont. I spent considerable time choosing my costume. The goal was to look spectacular while maintaining an air of dignified authority. I finally settled on a deep emerald silk gown with intricate beadwork, paired with a silver mask that complemented the locket Marcus had given me, and which I had decided to keep wearing, not as a symbol of our marriage, but as a reminder of the woman who had been strong enough to survive a war. The estate was transformed for the occasion. Thousands of candles created pools of golden light throughout the house and gardens. String quartet music drifted from the main parlor. Elaborate floral arrangements in autumn colors adorned every surface. It was Margaret's masterpiece, the annual event that cemented her reputation as Vermont's most accomplished hostess. I arrived fashionably late, partly for dramatic effect and partly because I wanted most of the guests to be present for Margaret's announcement. The valet recognized me despite my mask and whispered something to the doorman, who immediately disappeared inside Dot. By the time I entered the main parlor, Margaret was waiting for me, resplendent in burgundy velvet and an elaborate golden mask. That made her look like a Medici princess. "Vivienne, you look ... formidable." "Thank you. It's a beautiful party, Margaret." "You've outdone yourself. I do hope you'll enjoy the evenings." Entertainment. At 9 o'clock, Margaret called for attention. The room gradually fell silent as she positioned herself near the grand piano, where a microphone had been discreetly placed. "My dear friends," she began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the packed parlor. "Thank you all for joining us for another year of Halloween revelry. Your continued support of our local charities means more than you know." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Before we continue with tonight's festivities, I need to address a small matter of business. Some of you were present at our family gathering several weeks ago, where I made an announcement regarding certain property transactions. I could feel the attention in the room sharpening. Several people had turned to look at me, though my mask provided some anonymity. I'm afraid I spoke in error that evening. I'd been given incorrect information about the ownership status of a particular property, and I made claims that were both legally inaccurate and personally inappropriate. Margaret's voice remained steady, but I could see the effort it cost her to continue. "The property in question belongs entirely to Mrs. Vivienne Ashford, and no one, including myself, had any authority to make decisions about its sale or transfer. I apologize sincerely for any confusion my comments may have caused. The silence in the room was profound. Margaret Ashford did not make public apologies. She did not admit error. She certainly did not acknowledge that someone else had been right, while she had been wrong. Furthermore, she continued, I want to publicly acknowledge Mrs. Ashford's professional expertise. She recently helped our family recover from a significant financial error, a service for which we are deeply grateful. This was more than I had asked for, but I appreciated the gesture. Now, Margaret concluded, her voice regaining its usual authority, let's return to the celebration. The evening is young, and there's still dancing to be done. As the crowd dispersed and conversation resumed, I found myself approached by several people who wanted to express their admiration for how I handled the situation. Dr. Hartwell mentioned that he might need financial consulting services. Mrs. Thorne asked for my business card. The mayor suggested lunch to discuss some municipal investment opportunities. It was gratifying, but also bittersweet. These were the same people who had witnessed my humiliation 3 weeks earlier. Now they were treating me with the kind of respect I'd been seeking for 3 years. Margaret found me later in the evening, as I was standing on the terrace overlooking the gardens. The party continued inside, but I needed a moment of quiet to process what had happened. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For teaching me something about underestimating people. I turned to look at her. Margaret, can I ask you something? Of course. What did you think would happen? When you announced the property sale, when you laid out the trust requirements, what did you think I would do? She was quiet for a moment. Considering the question, I thought you would accept it. I thought you would realize that fighting the family would be more trouble than it was worth. You thought I would give up. I thought you would be practical, I smiled. I was practical, just not in the way you expected. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the costumed figures move through the lighted gardens below. For what it's worth, Margaret said, finally, Marcus is miserable. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? I considered the question honestly. Yes, I am. I never wanted him to be unhappy. I just wanted him to choose our happiness over your expectations. I've spent 34 years training him to seek my approval. That's not easy to overcome. No, it's not. Margaret turned to face me fully. You know, in different circumstances, I think we might have been friends. In different circumstances, we might have been family. Yes, we might have been. I left the party shortly after that conversation. As I drove back to the house, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not happiness, exactly, but something deeper, the satisfaction that comes from having faced a challenge with integrity and emerged victorious. The lake house welcomed me with its familiar warmth. I built a fire in the stone fireplace and poured myself a glass of wine, not a $4,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux, but a perfectly good Vermont vintage that I'd chosen because I enjoyed it as I sat by the fire. Still wearing my emerald gown and silver mask, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago when I'd first met Marcus. She'd been successful, confident, and independent. But she had also been eager to belong somewhere, to be accepted. By people she thought mattered. The woman sitting by the fire now was different. She was still successful, still confident, still independent. But she no longer needed anyone else's permission to matter. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus, I heard about tonight. I'm proud of you. I typed back, thank you. Be well, Marcus. And then I turned off my phone, removed my mask, and settled in to enjoy the fire and the silence and the perfect solitude of a life that belonged entirely to me. 6 months later, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. Margaret Ashford was hosting a spring charity luncheon, and she had personally requested my attendance as a guest speaker. The topic, Women in Finance, Building Independent Wealth in the Modern Era. I accepted, of course. The luncheon was held at Burlington's most exclusive country club, with an audience of influential women from across Vermont and beyond. Margaret introduced me with genuine warmth, describing me as one of our state's most accomplished financial professionals, and a woman who understands that true wealth includes the freedom to make your own choices. My speech was well received, and afterward, several women approached me about investment consulting services. By the end of the afternoon, I had 3 new high net worth clients and invitations to speak at similar events in Boston and New York. As I was preparing to leave, Margaret pulled me aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a vintage silver picture frame, obviously an antique, with a note in Margaret's elegant handwriting. "For your lake house. Because every sanctuary deserves beautiful things." Thank you, I said. "It's lovely." "Marcus is seeing someone," she said suddenly. "A nice girl from Boston. Very traditional family. I hope he's happy." "He is. Or he's learning to be." "You taught him something important about making his own choices. And are you happy with his choice?" Margaret smiled. A real smile, not the carefully constructed expressions I'd grown used to. "I'm learning that my happiness doesn't depend on controlling other people's lives. It's a difficult lesson for someone my age, but liberating." We parted that day as something approaching friends. Not close friends. Too much history lay between us for that. But women who had reached a mutual understanding and respect. As I drove back to the lake house that afternoon, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. A year ago, I had been fighting desperately for acceptance from people who would never truly accept me. Now I was building a life based on my own values and priorities. Surrounded by people who appreciated my worth, the lake house had become the foundation of that new life. I turned the small office into a full consulting suite, and I now worked from home 3 days a week, managing my growing roster of independent clients. The morning coffee ritual on the porch had become sacred time. When I planned my day and reminded myself of how far I'd come, I never did remarry, though I did it occasionally. There were several promising relationships over the years, but I discovered that I had become quite particular about the kind of partnership I would accept. I wanted someone who would celebrate my independence rather than trying to contain it. Someone who would stand with me rather than asking me to stand down. Maybe that person would come along someday. Or maybe not. Either way, I was content. The revenge I'd taken on Margaret hadn't been dramatic or destructive. I hadn't ruined her financially or socially. Instead, I had simply refused to accept her judgment of my worth, and in doing so, I had forced her to confront the limitations of her own worldview. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is becoming so successful, so confident, so completely self-possessed that your opponents have no choice but to respect you. Sometimes justice doesn't. Roar! Sometimes it whispers with such authority that everyone stops to listen. And sometimes the greatest victory is discovering that you never needed anyone else's approval to live the life you were meant to live. As I pulled into my driveway that spring afternoon, the lake stretched out before me like a promise of infinite possibilities. The house welcomed me home with its familiar warmth, and I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something beautiful with your own hands. Your own vision, your own uncompromising standards. I had learned to play the game by my own rules. And I won. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes the most powerful revenge is walking away. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your truth in the comments. Because sometimes justice whispers and still echoes forever.